When is Grand Central Station on?
Okay.
I have no idea.
You don't have prices?
We're on camera.
Okay, we're at Tom and Honey's in Tampa, Florida. And we want to ask Uncle Hank and Aunt Edith to tell us a story. And Ted, if you're listening, this is at your request. You want to know, you want them to tell the story about Helen and Frank's secret marriage. So between the two of you, we should get the picture. So who can start?
Okay. Actually, I never thought about it as a secret marriage, because in those days we called it eloping.
Mm.
And that's actually what Helen and Frank did. They
But-
eloped.
We were in a first floor apartment,
Yeah. Just,
so he didn't need a ladder.
yeah. And nobody packed their peanut butter and jelly.
That's right.
But actually what happened, that was sometime in June, the year of,
19 and
I've forgotten. how old was I?
34?
33, 34,
33,
somewhere around
34.
there. And they didn't intend revealing their marriage, but it seemed we went up to Armenia
Mm-hmm.
for Labor Day weekend. This was a place that Mom and Pop, Grandma and Grandpa took us in the summer, and
So
was a resort.
A working farm resort in upstate New York, about 100 miles north of New York City. The farm was run by the Rothstein family. Might as well.
And we
Figured that
usually
out.
went there the last week in August, first week in September. And the end of the season was Labor Day, and they'd have a big party, and then everybody would depart, promising to be there next year and greet each other again.
Now, if I remember correctly, husbands didn't stay up there.
Well, the reason we went the last week, we actually went before that, and Papa would come up on weekends. The husbands usually stayed in New York and did their thing to earn their keep. And
We
then,
would meet the train in the station.
that's right, and then the husbands would come up on weekends. If anybody saw the movie Dirty Dancing, that's about that kind of
That's the location.
resort. I think that was like typical of a place called Grossinger's, which was in the Catskills in
We
New
weren't in
York.
the Catskills though.
We were in the Berkshires.
Mhm.
We were the
foothills.
yeah, we were the lesser level of vacationers. Grossinger was up here, Rothstein was down here. But at any rate, we came home from our Labor Day weekend and got home late at night, very late at night. And when we got in the apartment, which is off the street level, as Henry said,
On Walton Ave.
on Walton Avenue, Frank was in the apartment very late at night with Helen, which was definitely unacceptable in those days. And as they tried to explain to Mama, who was very annoyed that she was entertaining a male friend with nobody to chaperone.
We had two mothers that night. She was beside herself.
Yes. And of course needed an explanation, and finally they explained that there was nothing wrong with it because they were married.
At City Hall.
At that point, Mama became even more upset.
Became what?
More upset.
Oh, yeah, oh, right, yeah.
One might say furious.
Papa, as I recall, stood by quietly like he usually did. But there were many words flying back and forth, as I recall, at that time. And it resolved itself to the point where Mama's attitude was, well, you already did it. You know,
Done is done.
what's done is done, you made your bed, now lie in it, and all that kind of stuff.
Direct quotes.
Yeah, direct quotes, over and over again. And so that was kind of that, except that After that, there was, as I recall, there was a meeting with the Linebacks, which was Frank's mother and sister.
Mhm.
I don't recall who else was there, but they came to the house, oh, like the next Friday night, I think it was, and they were having much heated discussion on what to do about these two young people who went off and got married, and they're too young, they don't have an income, how are they gonna manage?
How old were they?
Well, Helen, I think, was 3 months older than Frank. Frank's birthday was July, Helen's was April. So she had turned 18, and
They had just graduated from Theodore Roosevelt High School.
that's right. And he was 18 in July. And so they were legal to get a marriage license, and
How long had they been married when this was
apparently
discovered?
it was sometime
Several
in,
She
weeks.
said
yeah,
June.
the end of July. Well, no, I said June, but that's not so. That's
Oh.
when they graduated
Oh,
high
oh.
school.
Mhm.
But I think they had to wait for him to turn 18,
which
which
was
was
in
in
July.
July.
Makes sense,
And so it must have been the end of July,
yeah. Okay.
beginning of sometime in August. Really have no idea, I don't recall.
You realize how careful and
Date.
proper they would be.
Yeah.
Actually,
They had to have,
Yeah.
yeah.
They
They
thought
did.
this all through, they were very careful, and proper, and
Yeah.
responsible. They didn't do anything wrong or evil in any way, shape, or form.
Right,
I'm
Absolutely.
absolutely confident of both of them of that.
Right,
Except
the
just keep
parents
the
didn't
families
think
totally in
that.
the dark on both sides.
yeah.
For
Well,
good
were
reason.
there occasions when you went on, to the mountains and Helen didn't go? That
Oh,
was-
yes.
And that was, I think
Nobody
what-
thought anything of it because Papa was home all weekend, or a week during the week. In fact, I think Helen was working at Garland
Yeah,
at the
right.
time, which is where Papa worked. And we all took our turns working at Papa's Garland Dress Company,
On 1400 Broadway.
right? Which
On
is
the
still there.
on the 29th floor.
Yeah.
Really?
But yes, there were times Helen didn't come, and because she did have a job. So, and Papa la-di-da his way through life anyway, and you know, he would never think there was anything to think about. But the parents, mostly the mothers, of these two young people decided that they were too young to be married. So they went through the procedure of executing an annulment,
kid.
some lawyer or whatever. And I was too young to understand all of that operation, but I know that they had the marriage annulled.
And I was totally in the dark, because I
Yeah.
was only little.
Yeah, let's see.
I was 5 or 6.
Helen was 18, I was 12.
So it was actually, they
I
actually
was
got it
4 or
annulled
5.
then.
There was what?
They got it officially annulled.
It was annulled.
Wow.
However, and it took a few weeks for that to
Means a
transpire.
court order must exist someplace.
Maybe
Yeah.
so.
There
think
must,
so.
for you genealogists, there's a court record of this
Should
in
be.
Bronx County Court someplace.
Somewhere.
Right.
No, I think it was someplace in New Jersey.
They couldn't
I-
get it annulled in New Jersey unless it was,
No.
they were married in New Jersey.
No, I think they were married.
In New Jersey?
I don't think it was in New York. I'm not sure, but as I recall, there was something came up about New Jersey, but I could be wrong.
On the Italian genealogical site, there is a groom's index for New York City that goes as far as 1938. So that if Frank was the groom on a wedding certificate in New York City, you should find his name in that index.
They got married before.
You said
that.
Italian?
The Italian Genealogical Society has accumulated a copy of the groom's index.
Right.
All grooms,
Yeah,
not
all
just
grooms,
Italian
yeah. Well,
grooms.
they didn't know it was
But
Italian.
this was in the earlier 30s.
Yeah, but I said through 1938.
Oh, through that.
From like
through.
1902 or something
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
I
So
see.
those are all listed, and they should be there.
At any rate, the next I recall was that Helen and Frank got to talk to Mama. I don't recall his mother being there, but I do recall that they explained that they really needed to be married.
Really, really.
Really, really married. And Mama was like, you know.
What, you were expecting something else?
Well, then somehow or other, Mama's whole attitude seemed to change. And it was like, well, we have to get you married. Yeah, I mean, after all,
now.
yeah,
That's what mothers do, right?
That's
And that's
right.
Yesterday.
that's right.
Where's the white
I
shotgun?
have no idea. I don't recall, but when I think about it now, why Helen and Frank didn't stand there and say, well, we told you so, but they didn't. And then the next thing I recall, I was told that I had to babysit my baby brother
Mhm.
because they had to go get Helen and Frank married. And I don't recall what day of the week it was or anything, but it was, I do recall it was a rainy day, kind of on and off rainy. It was a gloomy day. And I remember watching them when they left the apartment. I could see them go down the street to get on the elevated trains, wherever they were going.
This was sometime in the fall.
Sometime, yeah, and I have no idea when. But
same
the
year.
object was to get to a justice of the peace. And I think before that, they had to go through the paperwork of
In New York,
course,
they needed a license, they needed
license.
a Wasserman test,
No,
they needed a
not in
three.
those days.
Yes, you did.
I-
Wasserman test.
Well, if they
Yes,
did,
Why
don't
would they
recall.
need that? They just had it a couple months ago.
Well,
Not going to apply to this license, I don't think.
yeah, I really don't know those
Yeah.
details. All I remember
More
was
research to be done.
they were shuffling across the street, four of them, Helen, Frank, Mama, and Papa, shuffling across the street toward the elevated train, and I just had this feeling of urgency. They were rushing to get this couple married, and it was like, so why did they cut it off? I mean, at 12 years old, it made sense to me. But that's what Mama and Papa did, and of course with Frank's mom is lying back. And they came back later that night, and they did not fill me in on the details, but I was aware of the fact that now Helen and Frank were married. And I got moved out of the bedroom into the daybed on the foyer, so Frank could move into the bedroom with
Helen's
Helen.
bedroom. The job became Helen's
Yeah,
bedroom.
the bedroom became Helen's
And
bedroom.
I can only remember it as Helen's bedroom, because I can't remember what went before when you were sharing the room with her.
Really,
Yeah, I was just barely old enough
yeah,
when they got married
uh-huh,
to understand that that was their bedroom.
yeah. Well, I didn't think of it as Helen's bedroom, I thought of it as my bedroom.
You were
Right.
on.
No, it didn't really matter.
You
one
were
way or
kicked
the
out of
other.
your bedroom, that's what it boiled
Yeah, I
down
was
to.
kicked out, yeah.
Unceremoniously.
way.
And you weren't even asked about it, were you?
Oh, no, no,
You
nobody
don't
asked,
sleep there.
nobody asked
Get your things.
anything. Yeah, that's right, take your things out of the drawer. Anyway, the time went on, and Frank got a job. I'm sure you know this part. Frank got a job with a Canadian club selling
Dry.
Canada Dry.
Canada Dry.
That's right. A Canadian club. Anyway,
It's Canada.
Canada Dry.
Probably the same outfit.
And everybody was very proud of him. And every morning when he'd get up
This-
and he'd dress for work, and Helen would always, I remember she always fixed a little handkerchief in his pocket, make sure his tie was straight, because now
What did he
There's-
do for
there's
it?
something
was
I can-
selling.
There's something I can contribute here. This was in the depth of the Depression.
Yeah.
Jobs were very
Oh.
scarce. And Frank wanted to work. He didn't want to get welfare or any of those things. He wanted to work. And he just every day he went out for a job. And then one day he came home and announced, I got a job. And there was like a party in the house.
Yeah.
No one asked him what was the job doing, or what he would make, or where he would have to go. That he had a job, there was like a celebration. I can remember that.
Yeah,
Frank
it
got
was.
a job. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
World was different then.
yeah.
Oh, I have to go to work.
At any rate, time went on, and of course, Teddy was born. As time went on, and then you were born, Paul was born.
They were still living in your house?
No.
No, they got to South Ozone Park first.
Was that the first place they lived?
Yeah, they lived in South
No, they
Ozone.
lived in Corona.
Before South Ozone Park?
Sure. Yeah, on the 3rd floor.
Yeah, that was the attic apartment on,
Yeah,
I
because
thought that was.
we moved to Corona to be near them. My mother could not be without her darling
Was
daughter.
this before Ted was born or after?
Ted was born in Corona? No,
born in
he was an infant.
1936.
No, we were on Walton Avenue and they were with us,
When Teddy was born, because
When
I can't
Teddy
remember
was
Teddy
born,
being changed
yes.
on the bed.
yes.
Yeah, okay, that's
They were
correct.
still
That's
with
correct.
us on Walton Avenue and, when Teddy was born. And then they moved to, I
To
guess.
Corona.
To
Yeah.
Corona,
And then we moved to Corona right after
yeah.
that.
And, then Paul was born. Now,
And then they moved to South Ozone, not South Ozone Park, Flushing. Wasn't South Ozone Park, it was Flushing.
when did they live in South Ozone Park? I know they did.
They never lived in South
Yes,
Ozone Park.
they
You did.
did. No. Should we now battle? Troy
Well, I won't
House.
argue these points.
At any rate, those details don't really matter.
yes, they do.
What I wanted to get to, since the subject matter was Helen and Frank and their marital status,
Mhm.
years went on and they moved to California after Bill was born. Frank went out, got a transfer. By that time he was working at the shipyards, and he got a transfer from the Brooklyn Navy Yard out to San Diego.
Mhm.
And he finally got a place to live, and then Helen took Teddy, Paul, and Bill.
Bill
That
was
was
still in her arms.
1945, because Russell was an infant. Russell was just
I
born.
met them at the
in
72nd Street station of the IRT because I had to go north to track practice at Van Cortlandt Park. And they were coming from, I guess, Webster Ave.
No, Valley Stream.
No, they were all.
Oh, that's right, they just came to visit us in Valley Stream.
And they came, and they stopped going down south, and I stopped going up north, I think it's 72nd or 96th Street, so that I could say goodbye to Helen and the boys.
Yeah,
I can remember that clearly.
yeah. She had Billy in her arms.
That's right. And the other two hanging
And the
on.
other two hanging on, and she traveled with them.
Oh, Teddy was
out
older
to-
then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she traveled nevertheless with the three of them out to California. I think it was just before, well, some years went on, and Helen started going to church, to the Catholic Church, and became very involved in it, and decided that she would convert to Catholicism. Became very actively involved in the Catholic Church, and I believe at that time that's when she had you guys christened or baptized or whatever. I'm not into those details, so I really don't recall, but I'm sure once she became, got into the Catholic religion, I'm sure it was important that you were all christened. Now, it was a matter of, she was not Catholic. This was during the time she was making the conversion. She was not Catholic, so they wouldn't, excuse me, I think they wouldn't christen you guys or something. There's a technicality there about whether who gets christened or what. I'm not familiar with Catholicism. However, I know at the time she felt that they were not completely married in the true sense of the word until they were married in the Catholic Church.
Yeah. That's
So
probably right.
that's how come they got married in the Catholic Church. So that was 3 times that they tied the knot. So we decided that, I guess it's gonna hang on to the hold.
Well, they got married again later when they renewed their vows.
They renewed their vows, that's not a marriage.
4
yes.
times.
Just renewing their vows, yeah.
At that time, my mother, if she was alive, would have begun to believe that they were serious about this.
Yeah.
but not really believe it.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, that's how it all came about. And these two kids from Theodore Roosevelt High School in the Bronx, he was a football player, and she, for a brief time, was a cheerleader. And they fell in love and lived happily ever after.
Was elopement a common thing, or not common, but
No.
frequent, or not so
no.
rare?
In our family or out of our family?
No,
Yeah.
outside, just in society.
society.
Well, I have a copy of a wedding certificate that you had been retaining all these years, which suggested that a young man and young woman had gone to New Jersey and gotten married.
Oh, yeah, the generation before that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You're,
but they didn't have anybody to, they
Well,
didn't
they-
elope because they,
well, they had,
the terminology was kind of really a loose terminology. Then when the elopement was, and I don't know how Webster defines elope, but it's
they didn't
to,
escape.
yeah, it's to do
In something
something without the knowledge of
Well,
surrounding
they did that.
areas.
Neither side of the family would have agreed to mom and
you mean
dad
Mom or
getting,
Papa?
yeah.
Yeah, what he's talking about is Grandma and Grandpa got married in New Jersey, and that was when they got out of the orphanage and they met and all that kind of stuff.
Well, she was out of the, he was never in the orphanage.
Why don't you go back
Yeah.
and talk about that? That sounds really interesting.
So you're saying that grandma and grandpa, or especially grandma, was upset because they did the same thing that
Well,
she did?
not really. Yeah,
Well,
you would think that.
there's an echo here.
Yeah,
Part of the problem of Helen and Frank needing to get, well, wanting to get married and then doing it secretly by eloping, was that his family was Catholic and her family was Jewish.
Right,
And that really wasn't going to play too well.
right, yeah.
Now, the background to that is that my mother, Helen's mother, was Catholic, and my father, Helen's father, was Jewish. Her family would not approve of her marrying a Jew, and his family was never very happy about his marrying a Catholic.
Right.
So they went to New Jersey and got married and didn't bother asking anybody's permission. They didn't need anybody's permission, but they didn't bother to ask it,
Right.
and they just did it.
Right.
And lo and behold, their oldest child did exactly the same.
Amazing.
Nuts and trees. They don't fall very far.
Yeah, the story of Mom and Pop, Grandma and Grandpa is that Grandma was in an orphanage for a while, and then some members of her family were able to, when she was 16, have her released from the orphanage. No, then you tell the story.
Aunt Margaret was never an aunt.
Okay, well, no, I realize that,
yeah.
okay.
My mother's mother died sometime around between 1899 and 1905 or something like that. Somewhere in that area. I don't have a record of that. She and her sister Nellie were separately, individually placed in the care of the sisters of the sisters of, I can't think of the name now, who had a convent on 69th Street, 65th Street on the east side of Manhattan, who took in wayward or lost children and raised them as wards of the city, or whatever they were wards of in those days. Separately, they were placed in there, first Nellie, who was, I guess, only 3 or 4, and then Mary, Mamie, when she was 9 or 10. But they billed her as only 5. I don't know how they got away with that, but they did. And Sacred Heart, no. Anyway, they stayed in the orphanage until they were 16 because that's what the law required. On your grandfather's side, their mother died in 1906. Yetta died in 1906. And Jacob lost control of the family. He had 7 children, and he just simply couldn't take care of them. The oldest 2, Harry, whom you all know, and Dad, whom you all know, were old enough not to need to go into an orphan asylum. The next one, Helen, really should have gone into an orphan asylum, but evidently Aunt Dina needed a housemaid. And Helen wound up at age 11 or so with Aunt Dina. Helen died in 1913 at the age of 18. The younger ones, let's see, it'd be Izzy, Danny, Martha, and Anna went to the National Jewish Orphan Asylum, or whatever they call it, on Amsterdam Avenue in Manhattan. And they each stayed until he was 16. Anna, as a matter of fact, was never in that particular place. She went to a foundling home because she was so tiny when her mother died. And then Anna was transferred to the Shelter and Guardian Society in Westchester County, where she spent the rest of her time until she was 16 and then was released. At 16, you became an adult. The family stayed split up until Jaime got married first in 1914, Harry exactly a year later in 1915. And the next record I find of them, well, they both registered for the draft in 1917 and were considered unacceptable for having bad teeth and being too short and having no eyesight that anybody could detect. By 1920, Martha was now out of the orphan asylum, was living with Harry in the Bronx on Tinton Avenue, and Grandpa Jacob was living with them. They were perhaps in a straight line 10 miles from Anna, but they didn't go and get her. I don't know if they could have gotten her, but they never did.
Left her there.
They left her there until she came out. She graduated.
Excuse me.
There was also another group of the family, Uncle Joe, who lived on Tinton Avenue, I think 3 blocks from there, who also had jobs and people living with them and so forth, but they didn't go get anybody either. Izzy got out of the...
They didn't rescue them from the
They didn't rescue them,
orphanages?
no.
They were there until they were 16.
Yeah.
Huh.
Izzy turned 16 around 1914, I think, something like that, and immediately tried to enlist in the service. Could not get into the American military, but was acceptable with the Canadians because they were busy pouring cannon fodder across the ocean. By the time we got into war in 1917, he was transferred back to the American military service. Danny sort of disappears. He pops up here and there, but you can never tell exactly what he's doing, how he's making a living, or where he's hanging out, or who he's hanging out with. But he did learn several systems for figuring the ponies out. Izzy was very good with dice, I understand.
Yeah. Yes.
And of course you all know that Dad was very good with a billiard stick.
With what?
A billiard stick.
He played
a cue.
Oh, really?
As a matter of fact, it's my understanding that he made his living taking fish in pool halls all over Lower Manhattan. But that he was so broke and such a bum that he slept on pool tables. And I think that Mama saved him from a life of sin. And I don't think he ever forgave her.
Yeah. Mama, incidentally, was invited to be with the one who isn't her aunt.
Aunt Margaret.
Margaret.
Well, so was Nellie. They both
Yeah.
released to their Aunt Margaret.
But that ended up, they were more like the maids than part of the family.
Everybody got a job. instantly they got out. There was an arrangement apparently. They went to Aunt Margaret, they got jobs in big companies like the telephone company and the electric company, and then they each came in on payday and lined up, and Margaret sat in the hall with her apron spread, and they dumped their pay envelopes on her lap. So my mom did that a couple of times, but that wasn't really her thing to do. So one day she didn't do that, and that started a chain of events that left her out on the street.
And then somehow or other she met Grandpa,
And saved her.
either in or outside the billiard hall. And both of them were in the same, more or less the same
Yeah.
position, where they were on their own. They really didn't have any place to call their own. And it seemed like the family didn't care if they had any family, they weren't being cared for. And so they really rescued each other and decided that the two of them could make out better than...
Two lost souls,
Yeah.
essentially.
So they went to New Jersey and got married.
Mhm.
And then Papa started, well, Papa did lots of things before he got into garland dress.
He, in 1910, he and Harry had jobs in lace factory, or trimmings factory, something.
Drove
ordinary-
taxis.
Yeah, they drove taxis. Dad was never very good at that. Terrible driver. Maybe the worst that
Uncle
ever
Harry
lived.
was, Uncle Harry was okay.
Yeah, Harry was okay.
Hmm.
And they did all kinds of various jobs. Harry, of course, remained the cab driver his entire life, and he holds or held one of the very first cab drivers' licenses in New York City. He also had his own medallion,
Yeah.
a picture of which is on the family page.
Mhm.
I'll try to get.
But as time went on, they all made their way, and when Papa got into this garland dress, was a wholesale dress manufacturer in New York, and he was just part of the shipping department, packing packages, but he ended up being the head shipping clerk after many years, so that during the Depression, we were very fortunate because even though his company, or the boss of his company, had told them that they had a choice, he either had to close the doors because he couldn't keep the place going, or they could all take a cut and pay, like half pay. So of course most of them chose to take the half pay, which was at least something, a lot less than what they were used to, but it was at least some income. So Papa stayed with the company, and
He also had a job on the train, sorting mail between New York and Philadelphia.
that's how he supplemented things.
And there was another job he had also. And so at one time he had 3 different jobs in order to support the family. And one thing was always said, Mom always said, every time we move to a better place.
Which was true,
We always moved up, we never moved down.
yeah.
So,
We moved a lot.
well, as soon as the 3 months concession ran out.
Yeah, and if the landlord wouldn't paint the kitchen and bath, Mama would say, the heck, move in, and we'd go up the street and get an apartment up the street. Because when you moved into an apartment, the landlord always had to paint the kitchen and bath. But if you still lived in the apartment, the landlord had the choice of doing it or not. So if he decided not to, then Mama would just move up the street to a new landlord.
Always a better building, though.
But yeah, it was always a better neighborhood, a better building. And so actually, Papa got us through the Depression. And I have to say that we were never without food. It was limited sometimes, you know, when
What did you do
funds
with the
were...
nickel I gave you last week?
Yeah, the funds were really tight, but we weren't on the bread line. We did not stand and wait for food.
We didn't wear hand-me-down clothes.
We didn't, and like Henry said, we moved to a better place every time, and I have to give credit to both of them for their perseverance and their, as peculiar a couple as a lot of the family thinks they were. They were very dedicated to us as their family.
Three mitigating things for the peculiarities of Mom. First, her family's conditions before her parents died were very bad. They lived in Hell's Kitchen on West 27th Street, as bad as you can imagine it being. She had a brother named Martin who died in 1900 at age 5, 1901 I guess. As I said, she and her sister Nellie were in the orphan asylum. She was estranged from her father, died in 1917. Nellie got married to somebody, Bill
That's a whole other
Dugard.
story.
Bill Dugard. And Nellie's life was always miserable and unhappy, and she never gave her sister any great joy, because that was just a terrible tragedy. And then Helen was born in 1915, great joy. Now, Helen was born when they lived on 27th Street. They started out this process in that same god-awful slum on West 27th Street in Manhattan. Dad called it Chelsea, but actually it was Hell's Kitchen. They moved from there to the Bronx, and then Henrietta was born. And at the age of 6, Henrietta was killed in an accident. And I'm sure that Mom felt responsible for that.
Mama was never the same.
Never the same.
Never.
I don't think she was ever the same after Martin died either. I think she was the oldest, and she was old enough to know that her kid brother died, apparently of spinal bifida, judging by the death certificate. And I think she felt responsible for that, and then Henrietta went and she felt responsible for that, and she never really got her feet under her after that. Things kept striking her down. And that accounts in some measure for the mercurial temperament.
A lot of people thought that Mama was very cold and callous because she was not an outwardly emotional person. She wasn't a
To say the
hugger and a
least.
kisser. Yeah.
To say the
But
least.
Mama was a bag of sand with a hole in the bottom, seeping away. But people didn't recognize that. And she was mush inside. But on the outside, she had this facade of capability and everything under control and domineerance and every other.
She told me a story once. She told me this story more than once. That shortly after Helen was born, she was visited by a priest. My only conclusion is that he must have been sent by her father, because there was no one else to have done this. And he informed her that her child was a bastard, not born of a legal marriage to a Catholic, and that she had committed a terrible sin. That's the way people talked in those days. Mom, of course, threw him out. He's lucky he escaped with his life, I think, but that indicates the depth of rejection she felt from her father's side. She never, to my knowledge, mentioned ever having seen him again. Yeah, never. I cannot remember a single instance.
Never
of her.
spoke about her family or.
It was just blank.
Yeah.
On the other hand, she tried very hard to fit into Dad's Jewish family. And to give them no credit, I think they made no effort whatever to understand her or accept her or take her into the family bosom. And I think they resented her, and I think they showed it to her. Am I right?
Absolutely. They didn't mean to, but
They were ignorant.
That's the way it was. She was the shiksa, she was the outsider, and because she was different, like I said, she was outwardly a strong person, and she wasn't a hugger or a kisser or anything like that, and they just saw her as different.
One thing she would never kiss was behind.
Yeah.
That was one of her problems.
And she always said, people who are hugging you may have a knife in their back, in your back. And so she was different. And then after Henrietta died, she was very different. And so she never felt like she was really a part of the Levine family, as hard as she tried. And she was going to be Jewish. She was going to, she took had the rabbi come in and learned all the ins and outs of the Jewish faith, but she never actually completed the arrangements, but she always considered herself Jewish because she had rejected the Catholic religion. She felt she saw too many
Did they
things.
take you to temple? Did you go to temple
No,
with
ma'am.
your family?
No.
or-
Well,
They
you
didn't-
took Hebrew lessons
No,
for a
I
short
didn't.
time.
No, I
You-
did.
you
I
made-
remember being asked about it, but I never took them.
I stood with my girlfriend Jane Schwartz, the building across the street from us.
Where?
On Walton Avenue. There was a building,
There were 2 private houses and an empty lot.
it was like, not directly across the street, it was like at a little angle, that first house after the empty lot. And you were in, there was a walk-in
it's very
apartment.
little then, yeah.
There was a walk-in apartment, and the rabbi was holding,
Cater.
the what?
Cater.
Whatever.
School for Jewish
Yeah,
kids.
and you were there, maybe it was 2 or 3 times in
I don't
a
remember
week.
any of that. I remember the
Well,
house.
I do.
but
The
don't remember
reason I remember it is because Jane and I stood on this windowsill outside, looking in and giggling at all you guys because of the yarmulkes and the Jewish words that we didn't understand. And we just thought it was, and I know if Mama ever saw me, that
She would kill you.
you'd pick me up with a sponge. But we did it very briefly.
I
and we
never
did
heard this story.
Well,
never
I
heard this
remember
story.
it very clearly.
I don't recall
But
that.
then you wanted no part of it, and you never went back again. I
I
have
was
no idea what happened.
When I was about 13, or less than 13, one day, Mom and Dad spoke to me on the sun porch. I was going out to play ball or something. And I guess it was near my birthday. And Dad said, Henry,
As he usually did, yeah.
and I said, what do you want? He said, your mother and I have been talking, and when you're 13, it's time to be bar mitzvah. I said, it is? And he said, we wondered if you wanted to go to school and take the lessons so you could make a presentation and be bar mitzvah. And I thought for maybe, at least 3 or 4 microseconds. And I said, no, I don't think so. And they never argued with me, they never challenged it, and that was the end of it.
Oh.
Yeah,
So your mother was not of Jewish faith then?
At all.
no,
And she was from a Catholic?
Yeah.
she was
That's
raised in a
the
convent.
Irish. They were that she was an Irish.
right.
The
So
name
that's
was
the
Connaughton.
exact same situation as Helen and Frank then.
Yeah,
Almost
Except-
exactly.
Yeah.
Roles reversed.
Except
That's what-
just a gender reversal.
Yeah.
that's right.
That's right.
It's amazing, yeah.
Anyway, that
That's
is
why
the
it's so,
saga.
always so funny to me
Yeah.
that there was such a furor in our family about it
Yeah.
when they had done the same blooming thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe they knew where it led.
Yeah.
But for them, it led to a long, unhappy armistice.
But that's the saga of Mamie and Jaime and Helen and Frank.
And that's
So-called
amazing.
secret wedding.
That's a great.
Mhm.
Kid.
great
The
story.
elopement.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Incidentally, I remember being told that Frank's mother was not very happy with their not getting a Catholic wedding
Oh, yeah.
in the first place.
Oh, that was the turmoil. That was what the arguing was all. And I have to tell you a little aside. On Friday nights, Dick Powell, who, I don't know if you know, he used to be a singer, he became an actor. but he was a singer
A
originally.
crooner.
And he had a radio program on Friday nights called Hollywood Hotel.
Mhm.
I was madly in love with Dick Powell. And so Friday nights came and that radio went on and I had my ear to it.
There was a little footstool
There was
we
a little
had.
footstool,
like
right.
that, And she
And,
sat in front of the radio.
and Frank's mom came in and they were having this meeting. With conversations started, of course, you know, the house was just an apartment and the living room was the dining room, the living room, the family room and everything. And the radio was there, an old majestic radio. And their voices started to get louder and louder. And I made the mistake of turning around and saying, shh.
She was listening to Dick Powell
Yeah.
crooning love songs to her.
When they picked me up, I had Mark. It happened so fast, and of course I was just taken and thrown into the foyer, which is where I belonged, and that took care of Dick Powell and me. But that was that incident, and so
They were rather
so-
upset, and there was rather high
Yeah.
tension in the house.
And yes, and that was the issue at that time, was that, well, first of all, Frank's mom wanted them to immediately convert, wanted Helen immediately to convert to Catholicism. Forget the marriage, forget anything, just convert to Catholicism. And of course, Mom and Pop's issue was, you know, the marriage and all that kind of stuff. So they got pretty loud and pretty rowdy about it. And I laid on my daybed crying. But yeah, they all finally, and this is something that I recall thinking, and whatever I was, 12 or 13 years old, I recall thinking, so what was the big fuss about?
Because everybody's
You know,
friends now.
Then they all, well, they weren't really friends, but they all
They made
calmed
peace.
down and they made the best of the situation. Of course, then when Frank got the job, you know, and all that kind of stuff, everything was fine.
Note that they lived with us, not with his parents.
Oh, they never lived with his
I
parents.
know, they
Yeah.
lived with us.
That's right,
Okay.
yeah.
Now, when they lived with us, Frank kind of became a big brother to me. He was the first adult, 18 years old, first adult male ever to pay attention to me. My father never paid me any attention at all. Not that I can recall, anyway. And he felt sorry for me because I was so pushed in the corner all the time. I guess they had plans for me, right?
Oh,
I was to
yeah.
be this, that, the
That's
other
right.
thing. And
Yeah.
Frank was a much looser guy than that. He couldn't quite see people having things done to them that way. He felt sorry for me and he began teaching me things. He taught me the first model airplane I built. He got me to become a junior birdman of America. And one day, he and I were working on a model airplane, and I had put it on the windowsill to dry. And a storm came up, and Mom closed the window on the plane. And you don't remember? And Frank saw it, and I don't remember that he swore, and he didn't say anything to her, but he sort of apologized to me for the cruelty of my mother to a little boy.
Yeah.
So obviously he saw my misery. I was a very miserable child. I'm still a miserable guy. Different kind of misery now.
Well, you do know when Teddy was little and he first got sick,
Mhm.
they had to give up their apartment, Ben, and they came and stayed with us. And in fact, Teddy was in an oxygen tent over the crib. In those days, they would put an oxygen tent
Crib
over the crib. Mhm.
was my bed.
You know, well, it had been, yeah. But yeah, he spent 7 years, was
In
it?
the crib.
In the crib, yeah. That's because I was in the foyer. But at any rate, but you know, those things, when you think about it, were really just incidental going through the Depression.
Yeah, a lot of people had a lot worse.
Yeah, that was nothing compared to what other people were experiencing. But when Teddy was so sick, That's, as a matter of fact, when Helen first started going, just realized, when Helen first started going to the Catholic Church, which was the Erb family,
Yeah,
lived
right.
close by, and they
You saw the
attended
discussion about the Erb family on the family page?
Well, Ted has been inquiring about it.
Right.
to get
well,
more
they
information.
were going to the Catholic Church, and that's when, because Teddy was so sick, they felt that, you know, she ought to be bringing her prayers to the church. And I think that's when it started stimulating Helen. But then there was too many other things were getting in the way as far as actually making the conversion, and she didn't really accomplish it until you guys went out to California. But there were other times when they had some difficulties, and they would come back and stay with Mom when we lived in Flushing.
Mhm.
And I think Frank was out of work temporarily or something, and they came and stayed at our house. And that's when Frank used to call me Queenie.
Oh, yeah, you would walk down the stairs, here
Yeah,
comes
right.
Queenie.
As a
Well,
teenager,
that was really pretty cruel.
well, as a teenager, you know, I envisioned myself in all sorts of atmospheres, and I suppose when I came in the morning, you know, it was a two-story house, and I would come down the stairs, and I didn't think I was doing anything strange. I was just coming down the stairs, and he'd say, "Oh, and here comes Queenie." And after a while, it was like, "Shut up already." But other than that, I mean,
The daybed had 3 parts to it, didn't it?
3 points.
Yeah, the daybed opened out into 3 parts.
I don't remember.
Yeah, I do, because it went with us to Flushing.
Oh yeah, it did.
And that daybed was spread out in the living room
Vaguely
for them
remember.
to sleep on.
Yeah, vaguely remember.
Mhm. But it didn't have bed bugs anymore.
No, yeah.
One reason for
Right.
buying their own house was that they could control the insect environment.
Yeah.
And once that happened, and Mom gained control over the borders, no insect ever again entered her house and lived.
Yeah. So, anyway, for Teddy, this is
Yes.
the story of
There you go.
family.
Oh, very
and
good, that's
Mama and
complete.
Papa and Helen.
Very
good.
complete.
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm
I
sorry. we have
appreciate
to-
Kurt and Connor, director and producer of this.
Right.
Yeah.
Equipment
Documentary.
provided
We're sorry
by
to-
Rising
to
Sun
make-
Productions of
Yeah.
Tampa, Florida.
Hank and Diana late for
Gonna
their
run a
next
trailer
one.
on this?
Yeah.
What's
I'm letting it roll a little extra just in case we want to put credits.
Oh,
Put
okay.
credits, yeah.
Yeah, long
There
line
you
of
go.
credits.
Let the rest of the crowd in now.
Yeah, right.